I inherited a quiet patch of land from my grandparents, a few acres of green overlooking a small lake. It wasn't valuable to most people, but to me it was the last piece of them I had. I always planned to build a little cabin there someday. Life kept me busy, so for years it just sat untouched, surrounded by trees a little overgrown but peaceful. Then, one second I drove out to check on it, maybe clear some brush, maybe finally start planning that cabin. I turned down the gravel road I'd known since childhood, past the old stone marker that marked my boundary, and froze. There was a mansion. A literal mansion, 3 stories tall, with stone walls, balconies, a circular driveway, and a fountain in front. It stood exactly where my grandparents' old oak tree used to be. For a moment, I thought I'd taken the wrong turn. I checked my phone's GPS, pulled up my property records, and even drove a loop around the area. No mistake. This house, this mansion, was sitting dead center on my land. Before I could even process how something like this could happen, a woman came striding down the driveway. She wore oversized sunglasses, a sun hat, and an expression that could curdle milk. "Can I help you?" She barked, like she already knew I didn't belong there. "Think there's been a mistake," I said, trying to stay calm. "This land belongs to me," she scoffed. "Excuse me. This is my property. We just finished construction last year." I showed her the deed I always kept in my truck. She barely glanced at it before flipping her hair and saying, "Then sue me." Then she turned and walked back toward her house. That was my first introduction to Karen. Over the next few weeks, I did some digging. Turned out Karen was president of the local HOA. Her husband was a contractor. They'd been building their dream home for over a year, and apparently, their builder had misread the boundary lines. About 40% of their mansion, garages, guest rooms, and part of the patio was on my property. I was stunned. How do you build a multi-million-dollar mansion without checking whose land you're on? When I brought it up to them again, Karen laughed in my face. She said, "We already have permits and a mortgage. There's no way you can do anything about it." What made things worse was that my electricity bills had tripled in the past few months. I hadn't been using power there, just an old meter connected to the property for maintenance. When I called the power company, they told me there was continuous usage coming from my meter. So, I hired an electrician to inspect it. What he found made my jaw drop. Karen's dream home was hooked directly into my power line. They'd literally tapped into my meter to power their mansion, lights, AC, pool, and everything else. That's when I stopped playing nice. I had the electrician document everything, then filed a police report for utility theft. I also hired a ling surveyor, the exact property boundaries. The results came back worse than I thought. Almost half their mansion was on my land, including the pool and backyard. I sent Karen a certified notice demanding she disconnect from the encroached portion immediately. Her response: a handwritten note on pink stationery that read, "So I called my cousin, who happens to be a real estate lawyer." He grinned when I told him the story. "This is going to be fun," he said. We started the legal process. Survey reports, property records, photographs, energy bills, the whole deal. Karen must have thought I was bluffing because she didn't even bother showing up to the first hearing. When she finally realized I was serious, she tried to settle by offering me $10,000 for the portion of land under her house. My cousin laughed so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. "She built a mansion on your property, stole your electricity, and wants to buy her way out with 10 grand. We'll take it to court." Months passed. The case got ugly. Karen spread rumors around the neighborhood, claiming I was a scammer, trying to extort her. She even stood up at an HO meeting and said, "This man doesn't understand property law." But what she didn't know was that I had every document lined up like dominoes. The court date came. My lawyer presented everything: the land survey, the power theft evidence, the utility company's report, and even a copy of the letter she'd sent me. Karen showed up in pearls and sunglasses, acting like she was in a TV drama. When the judge asked her to explain how she'd built on land she didn't own, she tried to blame her contractor. Then she claimed I had moved the boundary markers. The judge was unimpressed. In the end, the ruling was crystal clear: mansion had been illegally constructed across my property line. Because removing the encroachment would cost more than rebuilding. I was entitled to ownership of the portion of the structure on my land, and since that part included the main garage, guest rooms, and pool access, the rest of the house became effectively useless without my half. Karen screamed in the courtroom. She threatened appeals, shouted about corruption, and even told the judge, "You don't understand how Expudge just said. Maybe you should have checked where you built it." Within months, Karen and her husband defaulted on their mortgage. Between the lawsuit and the cost of separating utilities, the bank foreclosed on their property. It went up for auction. Guess who bought it? Me. I got the entire mansion for a fraction of what it cost to build. The same house she'd once told me I'd never touch. When I moved in, the first thing I did was plant a small oak tree where my grandparents had once stood. I also had the electrician restore the original power line, this time all mine, and just to add a little cherry on top, I renamed the Wi-Fi network to Thanks Karen 5G8s. Every night when I look out from the balcony that she once bragged about, I think about how poetic it all turned out. She tried to steal my land, my electricity, my peace. And in the end, she handed me her mansion. All I had to do was be patient, keep my paperwork in order, and let karma do the heavy lifting. When I first bought my lakeside lot, I imagined quiet mornings on the porch, coffee in hand, and nothing but birdsong and water lapping against the shore. It was supposed to be my escape from city chaos. A simple cabin, no neighbors breathing down my neck. The land was on the edge of a newly developing community, and the realtor mentioned there was talk of forming an HOA. I didn't think much of it. My lot was technically outside their boundary line, so I figured it wouldn't affect me. That was before I met Karen. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the new neighborhood, head of the HOA, self-described community leader, and full-time busybody. She introduced herself the day I broke ground on my cabin. I was unloading lumber from the back of my truck when she appeared at the property line in a pastel tracksuit, clipboard in hand, with a tiny dog yapping at her feet. "Hi there," she said, flashing a smile that looked like it was painted on. "I'm Karen, president of the Lakeside HOA. You must be the new property owner, as building a small off-grid cabin, just something modest." Her switched. "Oh, well," she said, glancing over my truck and the pile of lumber. "We have very specific standards for home designs in this community. Everything has to conform to the aesthetic guidelines. I'm not in the HOA," I said simply. Her eyes narrowed slightly, like a cat sizing up prey. "Well, technically, all the properties around here are subject to our association rules." "Except mine," I replied. "My deed says I'm exempt." She didn't like that. I could see the flicker of irritation before she plastered on her smile again. "We'll see about that," she said, and walked off with her clipboard. Over the next few weeks, construction moved along. My cabin was taking shape, and everything was going smoothly, until I started getting letters. Hand-delivered, stamped with Lakeside HOA. The first one said I owed $200 in community fees. The next said I was in violation of landscaping standards. Then came one accusing me of unauthorized construction. Each time, I ignored them. I wasn't part of their HOA, and I wasn't paying a dime. That's when Karen escalated. She started showing up uninvited, snapping photos, shouting across the property line about permits. Once, she even called the county inspector on me, claiming I was building illegally. The inspector came out, checked everything, and left shaking his head. "You're fine," he said. "Lady's a piece of work, though." Then, a month later, my electric bill exploded. It jumped from around $50 a month, just basic tools and lighting, to nearly $500. I assumed there was a billing error. But when the second bill came in even higher, I called the power company. They sent a technician. And after checking the lines, he came back looking baffled. "You've got another property connected to your meter," he said. "What?" "See this line here." He pointed to a buried conduit running off toward Karen's neighborhood. "Someone spliced into your feed. Whoever did it is pulling serious current, probably for outdoor lighting or a pump system." My stomach dropped. I walked over to the HOA's community center, a fancy way of describing a gazebo by the lake. And their brand new fountain, complete with colored lights, running 24 hours a day. And the wiring, you guessed it, coming straight from my line. When I confronted Karen, she acted like I was being unreasonable. "It's a community feature," she said, waving her hand. "We all benefit from it. You should be proud your electricity is powering something beautiful." I told her to disconnect it immediately or I'd call the power company and the police. She laughed. "You're not even part of the HOA. You don't have a say in community affairs." That was the last straw. I had the power company document the illegal hookup and cut it off. The fountain stopped running the next day, and Karen went ballistic. She stormed over to my cabin, screaming about vandalism and community sabotage. I didn't answer the door. Instead, I started digging, literally and legally. I went online to look up the HOA's registration records. In my state, HOAs have to renew their corporate status every few years. Guess what? The Lakeside HOA had missed its renewal 3 years ago. Legally speaking, it didn't exist anymore. Karen and her cronies had been sending out fines, collecting fees, and bullying people under the name of a dissolved organization. I couldn't believe it. So, I did the logical thing. I filed the paperwork myself. I paid the small reinstatement fee, listed myself as the new president, and reactivated the HOA. Under my name, it was 100% legal, completely by the book. A few weeks later, I called an emergency HOA meeting. Karen showed up in her pearls and heels, clutching her clipboard, ready to berate everyone. She didn't even look at the agenda. She just started in on me the moment I entered the room. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. I'm the new HOA president, I said, handing her a copy of the registration documents. You might want to check the signature. She blinked. What is this? The Lakeside HOA failed to renew its registration in 2022. I reinstated it last week. So, legally, I'm in charge now. The room went silent. The other residents, people who'd clearly been fed up with her for years, started whispering. One guy actually laughed out loud. Karen's face turned crimson. You can't do that. You're not even part of the HOA. A funny thing, I said. Fire him now. My property qualifies under the new bylaws. As she sputtered, threatened to call a lawyer and stormed out of the meeting. But it was too late. I'd already voted with the other members to dissolve all existing fines, cancel her ridiculous community fees, and reallocate the HOA's remaining funds to fix shared amenities, legitimately, this time. A week later, Karen tried to file a lawsuit against me, claiming I'd stolen her HOA. The judge dismissed it in 5 minutes after seeing the registration documents. From that point on, her power evaporated. Her authority was gone, her fountain stayed dry, and her reputation in the neighborhood went up in flames. People she used to bully started thanking me. A few even invited me to barbecues. The final cherry on top came a few months later. Karen and her husband listed their house for sale. Apparently, the stress had gotten to them. The same house that once glared down at my humble cabin across the lake now sat empty, for sale, sign in the yard. By then my cabin was finished. Small, sturdy, and perfectly mine. I'd even upgraded the solar panels and added a little patio overlooking the water. Sometimes on calm evenings, I'd sit there with a drink, watching the sunset reflect off the lake and the now dark fountain across the way. And every time I flipped, I couldn't help but smile, because the power running through those bulbs used to belong to Karen's HOA. And now, it was all mine. So, yeah, when people ask how I ended up owning an HOA without even trying, I just grin and say, thanks Karen.